I never planned to keep running into her. It just happened. There was this small corner coffee shop across from campus. Old glass windows that fogged up in the mornings, tables too close together, the kind of place where the milk frother was louder than the music. I'd sit by the window with my laptop, pretending to write essays, but mostly watching the street. And then she started showing up. Not every day. Just often enough that I noticed. A woman in her 40s, always in pressed clothes like she'd just stepped out of someone else's neater life. She carried a thermos even though she ordered coffee. She had this habit of smoothing the corner of her napkin with her thumb, again and again, like she was testing its edges. At first, she was just part of the background. Another regular. But the second time she remembered my order before the barista did, I realized she had been watching me, too. Americano. No sugar, right? She said, almost without looking at me. Yeah, I answered, too fast. Then added, guess I'm predictable. She gave this small, half smile. The kind that doesn't invite more conversation, but doesn't close it off either. That was the start. I'd catch myself glancing toward her table, where she always sat, back straight, hands folded around her mug. Sometimes she worked through a stack of papers. Sometimes she just stared out the window like the rest of us weren't there. There were little things. She laughed at something the barista said, and it caught me off guard, how warm her laugh was, how it didn't sound like it belonged to a woman sitting alone. Another morning, when I was fishing coins out of my pocket, she slid $1 across the counter without a word. I muttered thanks, but she didn't answer, only tucked her thermos under her arm like she'd done something ordinary. It wasn't ordinary for me. I didn't tell anyone about her. Not my roommate, not even the friend I usually shared too much with. She stayed in that quiet space where you keep things you don't want ruined, like a dream you don't say out loud in case it fades. Still, I couldn't help noticing the patterns in my own life. The way I left texts half-written in my drafts folder, staring at names I never sent them to. The way my phone lit up with group chats I didn't bother to answer. The way I lingered a little too long in the coffee shop after she left, like her absence rearranged the air. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just lonely. But loneliness makes you pay attention to small mercies, when someone remembers your coffee. When someone's eyes meet yours, steady, unhurried. When silence doesn't feel like punishment. It was a Tuesday when things shifted. Rain had left streaks on the window, and the place smelled faintly of wet coats. I was closing my laptop, ready to leave, when she spoke, unexpected, low enough that I almost thought I'd imagined it. You always leave just before I do, she said. I froze. She didn't look at me when she said it, her gaze stayed on the napkin she was folding, sharp corners, neat triangles. My throat felt tight. I never noticed, I lied. This time she did look up. Her eyes were steady, unreadable. Then she nodded, once, as if she'd made some quiet decision. I walked out into the rain, my shoes soaking through in minutes, and only then realized my phone had buzzed in my pocket. A message. From an unknown number. Next time, don't leave first. I stood under the awning, staring at the screen, while the rain blurred everything else into a soft gray. The next time I saw her, it wasn't at the coffee shop. It was on the staircase of the old house where I rented a room. She was standing by the railing, balancing a bag of groceries, keys dangling from her hand. I hadn't even realized she lived in the upstairs portion. My landlady, my quiet stranger from the cafe. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she broke the silence with something so ordinary it felt surreal. You live here? Yeah, I said, shifting my backpack higher on my shoulder. Room at the back. She nodded, like she was filing away a detail she should have known sooner. Then, softer, I'm upstairs. That was it. But from then on, every creak of the stairs, every closing door, carried a different weight. One evening, I came home to find her at the bottom of the steps, bags slipping from her hands. Reflex took over, I reached for them. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," I cut in, but I kept carrying them anyway. The bags were heavier than they looked, filled with bottles and paper-wrapped vegetables. She unlocked her door and let me set them on the counter. The room smelled faintly of ginger tea and old wood polish. She poured 2 mugs without asking. I sat, awkward, on the edge of a chair that looked like it belonged in a different decade. She stirred her tea slowly. "My husband used to make this. Stronger than I ever could. He said ginger fixed everything." I wasn't sure what to say. The word husband hung in the air like smoke. So I asked, "Does it?" Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Not everything." We sat in a kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was loaded, like both of us were circling things we wouldn't say. After that, I found myself listening for her. The soft thud of her shoes when she climbed the stairs. The faint clink of her thermos lid. Sometimes she left small notes pinned to the door about rent or repairs. I kept them longer than I should have. Still, the doubts came. In the middle of the night, staring at the cracked ceiling, I'd imagine what other people would think. That I was just a tenant, too young to know better. That she was too old to be sitting across from me with her tea, telling stories about a life I wasn't part of. And yet, when I saw her smoothing the corner of a napkin, or catching herself smiling at something on the street below, I felt the pull anyway. One night, I passed her on the staircase. She had a scarf loosely knotted around her neck, and the hem of her coat brushed my sleeve as we squeezed by each other. She paused, adjusting the scarf, fingers grazing my arm for the briefest second. "Sorry," she murmured, not looking up. "It was nothing. A slip." But later, lying awake, that touch replayed louder than anything she'd ever said. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The thing about silence is, once you've shared it with someone, it's never neutral again. I noticed it the next week. She wasn't at the cafe. For 3 days straight, her chair by the window stayed empty. I told myself I didn't care, but each morning, my eyes flicked to the corner anyway. On the 4th day, I ran into her outside the house. She was locking her car, arms full of folders. She looked tired, hair pulled back too tightly, scarf looped in a rush. "Busy week?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. She glanced at me, then away. Something like that. Her voice was softer than usual. A little frayed at the edges. I wanted to ask more, but her phone buzzed, and she lifted it to her ear. A low, clipped tone. She turned slightly, like she didn't want me hearing. I stood there, awkward, pretending to check the mailbox while my chest buzzed with something I couldn't name. That night, she knocked on my door. Just once. When I opened it, she was holding a dish wrapped in foil. "I made too much," she said simply. I knew she hadn't. We ate at my tiny table. The food was warm, careful, like her. She didn't say much, only small pieces, the college she'd gone to, how she hated eating alone. At one point, I caught her looking at my half-finished essay on the desk. "Still up late working?" she asked. "Yeah." "Deadlines." Something in her eyes softened. Then she reached for her glass, fingers brushing mine where I'd set it down. A pause. Too long for an accident. But then, a knock on the door. My roommate. "Yo, you got the charger?" "My phone's dead." I nearly swore out loud. He peered in, eyes bouncing from me to her. I saw the flicker of recognition, maybe even curiosity. Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt." She stood quickly, smoothing her blouse, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "I should go," she said. I followed her to the door, pulse loud in my ears. My roommate's footsteps faded upstairs. She lingered in the hallway, adjusting her scarf again, the way she did when her hands didn't know where else to be. "You don't owe me dinner," I said quietly. Her lips parted, like she wanted to answer. But all she did was shake her head, too quick, too practiced. Later, as she turned the key to her door, she looked back. Just once. Our eyes held longer than they should have. And for half a second, half a breath, she leaned toward me. Not a step. Not a kiss. Just the smallest tilt of her body, enough to make the air between us electric. Then she pulled away, retreating inside, door closing with a soft click. I stood there, staring at the wood grain, wondering if I'd imagined it. It was late afternoon when I saw her sitting on the bench outside the house. No thermos, no folders. Just her, staring at the street like she was waiting for something that wouldn't come. I hesitated, then sat down beside her. The bench creaked. For a while, neither of us spoke. "You weren't at the cafe this week," I finally said. Her eyes stayed on the road. "Didn't feel like being watched." I flinched. "I wasn't," she turned then, a small, tired smile softening the words. "I know." But the pause after stretched too long, and the air between us tightened. A group of students passed by, laughing too loudly, their backpacks bumping against each other. I wondered if she noticed how they glanced at us, then away. Like they knew something we didn't. Her hand rested loosely on the bench, fingers tapping once, twice, then still. I kept my eyes on them longer than I should have. Finally she spoke. "You remind me of someone I knew, back in college." I swallowed. "A good memory?" She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. "Not really. Just, careless. Full of things they never said until it was too late." Her voice dipped on the last word. The kind of dip that carried more weight than any admission. "I shouldn't be here like this," she murmured, half to herself. I wanted to tell her she wasn't doing anything wrong. That all we were doing was sitting on a bench, letting time pass. But the words tangled. Instead, I said, "Do you ever wish you could undo things?" She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt the ground tilt. "Every day," she whispered. The silence after that was unbearable. Her jaw tightened like she was holding something back. And then it broke. "I don't know what you see in me," she said suddenly, breath sharp. "I'm older. She stopped herself, pressing her hands together in her lap. "I shouldn't even let you sit here." Her voice wasn't angry, it was raw. Like a crack in the wall she'd been holding up. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, searching for something that wouldn't sound naive. But all that came out was, "I don't care." She turned her head away, a short, pained laugh escaping. "You will." For a moment, I thought she might stand and leave. But she didn't. She stayed, hands trembling just slightly, enough for me to notice. We sat there, the sun sliding lower, shadows stretching across the street. I could hear my own heartbeat in the spaces between her breaths. Then she shifted closer, not much, just enough that our shoulders brushed. Neither of us moved away. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, hesitant. The kind of look that asked without asking. And right there, on that weathered bench, the world felt suspended, like we were one word away from undoing everything. I opened my mouth. She closed hers. And the question hung between us, what are we doing? The next morning, she was gone. Not gone like vanished, her car was still in the driveway, curtains still drawn upstairs. But gone from the places I expected her to be. No coffee shop, no bench, no quiet steps on the staircase when I came home late. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. People get busy. People need space. But then the days stretched, and the absence began to feel intentional. One evening, I heard voices upstairs. A man's voice, low, uneven, like it hadn't been in her house for a long time. I froze halfway up the stairs. She laughed. Or maybe it was just a polite hum, hard to tell through the walls. I stood there too long, listening, then hated myself for it. Later, when the front door opened, I caught a glimpse. A boy, no, not a boy. Early 20s. My age. He carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes tired in a way I recognized. He brushed past me without a word. And then it clicked. Her son. She avoided me after that. Quick nods in the hallway. Doors closing a little too soon. The kind of distance that doesn't come from accident but from decision. I tried to keep myself from overthinking, but the silence was louder than any argument. My drafts folder filled with messages I never sent. Are you okay? Did I do something? Do you want me to stop? None of them left my phone. When I finally saw her again, it was at the cafe. She was at her usual seat, but she didn't look up when I walked in. She stirred her coffee, gaze fixed on the table. I thought about sitting across from her. Thought about pretending nothing had changed. Instead, I ordered my Americano and sat by the window, 2 tables away. Halfway through, our eyes met. Just a flicker. Long enough to remind me of everything unsaid. And then she looked away first. The strangest part was, I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I started leaving the cafe earlier, sometimes skipping it entirely. My room felt smaller than ever. Even my roommate noticed. "You're quieter these days," he said once, and I just shrugged. One night, walking up the stairs, I stopped outside her door. My knuckles hovered, ready to knock. A simple gesture. 2 taps. That's all it would take. But I lowered my hand. The hallway stayed quiet. And her door stayed closed. It happened in the kitchen. Not planned. Not dramatic. Just, late evening, when the house was too quiet and the light over the sink hummed faintly. I had come down for water. She was already there, rinsing a mug, sleeves rolled up, hair loose around her face. For a second, I almost backed away, but she glanced up before I could. "You're still awake," she said. "Couldn't sleep?" She nodded, setting the mug upside down on the counter. Her hands lingered there, pressing against the wood like she needed it steady. The silence stretched, thick, but neither of us moved. Finally, she spoke. "My son said he saw me with you. At the cafe." Her voice was level, but her eyes weren't. I swallowed. "And?" He asked if I was lonely. She let out a small, brittle laugh. I told him no. That I wasn't. A pause. But I think I lied. Her words landed heavy, not because they were loud, but because they weren't meant to be spoken. I shifted, leaning on the counter across from her. "I don't know what you want me to say." "Don't," she cut in, quick. "Don't say anything you'll regret later." We stood there, only a few feet apart, caught in that fragile space where the wrong word could shatter everything. Finally, I said, "I keep telling myself to stop thinking about you. But it never works." Her lips parted, like she wanted to answer, but her gaze dropped to her hands. She rubbed at a faint scar on her knuckle. "Do you know what it costs me? Just, standing here." I shook my head. "No," she exhaled, sharp and quiet. "Everything." The hum of the light filled the room. I wanted to reach out, close the distance, but I didn't. She looked at me then, and for the first time, she didn't hide. No practiced smile. No careful distance. Just tired honesty. "You deserve someone who doesn't second-guess every breath," she whispered. "Maybe I deserve someone real," I said. The words slipped out before I could pull them back. Something softened in her expression, like a door creaking open, only an inch. Her eyes glistened, though she blinked it away quickly. She stepped closer, not enough to touch, but close enough that I felt the warmth of her presence. Her hand twitched at her side, then stilled. Mine did the same. We didn't close the gap. We didn't have to. Instead, she let out a long breath, and in that breath was everything: fear, longing, guilt, relief. She looked at me, small smile trembling at the edges. "Okay," she said quietly. "Not a promise. Not a beginning. Just a fragile acknowledgement that we were both here, both exposed, both still choosing not to walk away." And somehow, that was enough. Time didn't stop after that night in the kitchen. It just slowed, softened. We didn't talk about us. No declarations, no late-night ultimatums. But the distance between our lives kept shrinking in small, almost invisible ways. She started leaving her door unlocked when she cooked, an invitation without saying it. I'd bring my laptop upstairs, pretending to work at her table, while the kettle hissed on the stove. She still made ginger tea, never as strong as she claimed her husband had, but strong enough for me to get used to the bite. And I stopped going to the cafe alone. Because most mornings, at exactly 8:47, she was already at the corner table, thermos by her side, waiting. Sometimes she read. Sometimes she just stared at the street. But when I sat down across from her, she always looked up, always smiled, quiet, steady. Like she'd been saving it. The bench outside the house became ours. Not every day. Not in any dramatic way. But often enough that I started measuring the seasons by what we saw there: the students rushing past in spring, the heavy coats in winter, the way the street lamps hummed at dusk in summer. Once, I asked her if she ever thought about undoing things, like she'd said before. She shook her head. Not anymore. That was all. But I knew what she meant. It wasn't perfect. Some nights she still pulled back, lost in her own quiet storms. And sometimes I lay awake, wondering how long this could last before life, or people, forced us apart. But then I'd hear her footsteps on the stairs, her thermos lid clicking open, the faint scrape of her chair pulling out across the floor. And I'd remember, perfection wasn't the point. Presence was. The last time we sat at that bench, it was late autumn. The leaves had already fallen, crunching underfoot as students passed. She had her scarf wrapped loose, fingers tugging at the ends the way she always did. "You know," she said, almost teasing, "you still leave first." I looked at her, remembering the first text, the first time she caught me in that lie. "Not anymore," I said. And I stayed. She laughed, soft, quiet, but real. Then she leaned just close enough for our shoulders to touch, and neither of us moved away. Looking back, I don't remember the exact day it stopped feeling dangerous. I just remember the ordinary moments, the coffee, the tea, the bench at dusk. Little things that became the proof. Maybe love doesn't arrive all at once. Maybe it collects itself, piece by piece, in every silence you're willing to share. And that's where we ended up. Not perfect. Not grand. Just, together. Did this story stay with you? Tell me in the comments, what kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?